You opened your phone last night, not because something important happened, not because you were waiting for a message. You opened it because a part of you did not want to sit with the silence. You scrolled for a few minutes, then you put it down, then you picked it up again. Then somewhere around the third time you put it down, you felt something, not guilt exactly, something quieter than that. A small, dull weight sitting somewhere between your chest and your stomach. You know that feeling. You have felt it before, and the strange thing is, you could not explain it to anyone if they asked. Now here is what most people would say about that moment. They would say you were distracted. They would say you were procrastinating. They would say you need more discipline, more willpower, more structure. They would hand you a productivity system, a morning routine, a list, but none of that touches what you actually felt, because what you felt was not a discipline problem. It was something older than that, something that has been moving inside you for a long time, quietly, below the surface, shaping your choices before you even know you are making them. There is a system inside you that most people never examine, not because it is hidden in a complicated way, but because it does its work so gently, so constantly, that you stop noticing it. Like the sound of a fan in a room, at some point you stop hearing it, but it is still running, and it is still moving the air. This system is not your thoughts. It is not your feelings. It is something deeper than both. The scholars who studied the human interior with careful, unflinching attention gave it a name. They called it the Nafs, and they spent centuries mapping it because they understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to approach. The Nafs is not your enemy, but it is not your friend either. It is more like a companion that has its own agenda. And until you understand what that agenda is, you will keep making decisions that confuse you, experiencing emotions that seem to come from nowhere, and cycling through the same patterns, wondering why nothing changes. Let us go back to that feeling, the one in your chest. When you picked up your phone for the third time, you did not want to pick it up. There was a part of you that knew it was not what you needed, a part of you that had somewhere else to be, something else to do, something more honest to sit with. But a different part of you reached for the phone anyway. Two parts, moving in different directions at the same time. That is not weakness. That is not a character flaw. That is the most fundamental experience of being human, and it has been documented by scholars and sages for over 1,000 years. But here is the part that matters. The part that reached for the phone won that moment, and it almost always wins, not because it is stronger, but because you were not watching it. The Nafs operates in a way that is precise and patient. It does not announce itself. It does not argue with you. It does not show up and say, I am going to pull you away from what matters now. It moves much more quietly than that. It shifts your attention just slightly. It introduces a small discomfort just before you are about to do something that requires effort or honesty. It whispers, not in words, but in sensations. A sudden feeling of tiredness, a vague sense that this is not the right time. A small, reasonable thought that convinces you to wait, and you listen. Not because you decided to listen, but because you were not aware that you were listening. This is why discipline alone fails. You cannot fight something you cannot see. There are people who have had the same morning routine for 3 years. They wake up early, they exercise, they eat well, and they still feel that hollow weight at night. Still feel that something is off. Still feel the distance between who they are and who they know they could be. Because discipline is structure, and structure is useful, but it cannot reach what is happening at the level of the Nafs. The Nafs does not live in your habits. It lives in your orientation, the direction your deepest attention is pointed. And you can have perfect habits while your orientation is completely lost. Think about that for a moment. You can be doing all the right things and still be going in the wrong direction. Now there is something the scholars identified about the Nafs that is uncomfortable to hear. They said the Nafs, in its natural, unexamined state leans toward comfort. Not happiness, not peace, comfort. The immediate absence of discomfort. These are not the same thing. Comfort is what you feel when you avoid the conversation you need to have. Happiness might come after you have had it. Comfort is what you feel when you scroll instead of sitting with your thoughts. Peace might come if you had sat with them. The Nafs does not think long term. It does not calculate. It does not weigh consequences. It pulls toward what removes the ache right now. And because most aches in your life can be temporarily removed by distraction, the Nafs has an enormous appetite for distraction. This is not a modern problem. Ibn al-Qayyim was writing about this 8 centuries ago. Al-Ghazali mapped it with surgical precision in the 11th century. They were not describing ancient people with ancient problems. They were describing the same creature that you are, because the Nafs does not change with time. Only its distractions change. Yours just happen to be more convenient and more constant than anything that came before. Here is the next layer. There is something else inside you, something the scholars called the Qalb, translated most simply as the heart, but not the emotional, romantic heart that modern language uses. Something more precise than that. The Qalb is the center of your awareness, the seat of your understanding. The place where knowledge becomes conviction and conviction becomes action. And the Qalb has a quality that you have almost certainly experienced without having a name for it. It can be whole or it can be divided. A whole Qalb knows what it wants. It moves toward things cleanly. There is no drag, no hesitation, no strange guilt after a good moment. When you have experienced clarity in your life, the kind that makes everything feel simple and purposeful, that was your Qalb in a state of wholeness. But a divided Qalb is something else entirely. A divided Qalb is pulled in multiple directions at once. It genuinely wants to be a better person and genuinely avoids the things that would make it better. It genuinely wants to be present with the people it loves and genuinely retreats into distance and numbness. It genuinely intends to change and genuinely returns to the same patterns, sometimes on the same day the intention was made. You know this experience. You have lived it. And here is what nobody tells you. The division in your Qalb is not a sign that you are a hypocrite. It is a sign that you are someone whose internal world has not yet found its alignment. Those are very different things. The Qalb becomes divided through a process so gradual you never notice it happening. It begins with small compromises, not dramatic moral failures, small, ordinary ones. You say something about someone that you know is slightly unfair. You do something you told yourself you would not do. You ignore an impulse toward honesty because it is inconvenient. You choose comfort over truth one time, then again. Each time, something small happens in the Qalb. Not destruction, just a slight film, a slight dimness, a slight reduction in its capacity to feel the weight of what it is doing. Al-Ghazali called this the rusting of the heart, not a dramatic event, not a collapse, just a slow accumulation of small moments that were never corrected. And here is the terrifying part. The more the Qalb dims, the less it can sense that it is dimming. At a certain point, a person can do things that would have disturbed them deeply 5 years ago and feel almost nothing. Not because they are evil, because their ability to feel the weight of those things has been slowly eroded by 1,000 small, uncorrected moments. This is not irreversible, but it is real, and it is happening to more people than you think, including perhaps you in some dimension of your life, in some corner that you have not looked at recently. Now stop, because this is where most people disconnect. They hear this and they begin to feel heavy. They begin to feel like they are being judged. They begin to feel like they are too far from where they should be. That heaviness is important information. Pay attention to it, because if you still feel the weight of that, then your Qalb is not as dim as you feared. Something inside you still recognizes the distance, still wants to close it. That recognition is the beginning of everything. It is called yaqaza, wakefulness. The moment when the interior becomes aware of itself again, and it is the rarest and most valuable moment in a person's inner life. Let us talk about patterns. You have at least one pattern in your life that you cannot fully explain, something you keep returning to, even though you know it does not serve you. Maybe it is a way of speaking to yourself. Maybe it is a relationship dynamic you recreate with different people. Maybe it is a way of sabotaging moments of peace just when things start to feel good. The Nafs loves patterns. It is comfortable in patterns, even painful ones, because a painful pattern is familiar, and the Nafs prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar growth. This is not metaphor. This is the mechanics of your interior. The scholars called this the commanding Nafs. The Nafs that commands toward what feels good and avoids what requires effort. And they were clear. This is not something you defeat once and never encounter again. It is something that requires constant, gentle, conscious attention, not war. Attention. There is a difference. When you go to war with the Nafs, you become rigid. You exhaust yourself with suppression. You build walls instead of understanding. And then, when the walls crack under pressure, you do not just slip, you collapse, because you built your control on force rather than understanding. But when you bring attention to the Nafs, something different happens. You begin to see its movements before they complete. You begin to notice the exact moment when the pull toward avoidance begins. And in that moment of noticing, something loosens. The pull still exists, but you are no longer unconsciously following it. That gap between the pull and the response, that is where you actually live. Think about the last time you broke a promise to yourself. Not a promise you made carelessly. A real one that mattered to you. One you made in a moment of genuine clarity and genuine intention. What happened in the hours before you broke it? If you trace it back carefully, you will find a sequence of small movements that led you there. A slight tiredness, a small rationalization, a thought that said, "This one time is fine," a feeling of resistance that preceded the action you knew you should take, and somewhere in that sequence a moment when you could have stopped but did not. The scholars were interested in that moment, because they understood that the entire architecture of a person's character is built from such moments. Not the dramatic decisions, not the obvious crossroads, the small, quiet, overlooked moments where attention is present but not applied, where awareness exists but chooses not to look. This is the concept they called ghafla. It translates roughly as heedlessness, but that translation does not capture the full weight of it. Ghafla is not stupidity. It is not ignorance. It is something more specific and more unsettling. It is the state of being conscious but not fully present, awake but not aware, moving through your life while the most important dimensions of your life are operating on autopilot. And here is what makes ghafla so dangerous. It feels normal, not uncomfortable, not alarming, not even noticeable. It just feels like a regular day, regular scrolling, regular avoidance, regular small choices that seem insignificant but are in fact composing the person you are becoming right now in real time. Whether you are paying attention or not, you are always becoming. The question is only whether you are conscious of what you are becoming or not. There is a third element that the scholars spoke of with great care and great reverence. The ruh, the spirit. They did not over-explain it. They could not entirely, because some things about the ruh remain in the knowledge of Allah alone. But what they observed with humility and precision is that the ruh has a quality that neither the nafs nor the qalb possesses in the same way. The ruh is oriented upward, always. It does not pull toward comfort. It pulls toward meaning, toward truth, toward something beyond the immediate. And you have felt this. You have felt it in moments of unusual clarity, when everything petty and small fell away and you felt, for a moment, that something in you was larger than your daily life, that something in you knew things your mind had not figured out, that something in you ached for something that no distraction and no achievement has ever actually satisfied. That ache is the Ruh speaking, and most people spend their lives building louder and louder environments so they do not have to hear it, because the Ruh does not ask for much. But what it asks for requires a kind of courage that the Nafs finds deeply threatening. The Ruh asks for honesty, real, undefended honesty about who you are and what you are doing with your time and your attention and your capacity. And the Nafs will do almost anything to prevent you from being that honest. This is why you feel that strange, hollow feeling after you get something you thought you wanted. You worked for something. You achieved it. And then almost immediately, there was this flatness, this absence of the feeling you expected, this quiet, unsatisfying silence where the satisfaction was supposed to be. Most people interpret this as the wrong goal. They think they chose the wrong thing, so they set a new goal. They pursue that, they achieve it, and the flatness returns. This is not a goal problem. This is the Nafs chasing what cannot fill it, and the Ruh remaining quietly unsatisfied, because it was never consulted in the choosing. The Nafs wants arrival, the Ruh wants direction, and when a life is built entirely on the Nafs's terms, you can arrive at every destination you set for yourself and still feel, on some deep and honest level, that you are going nowhere. Now you might be thinking, this is all very interesting, but what do I do with it? And that thought, right there, is itself worth examining. Because the impulse to immediately extract an action step, a technique, a method, is the Nafs operating in a very sophisticated disguise. It sounds like productivity. It sounds like practicality. But what it is doing is moving you away from sitting with the realization long enough for it to actually change something. Knowledge that is processed too quickly stays at the level of the mind. Knowledge that is allowed to settle, to be felt, to be resisted, and then accepted, moves into the Qalb. And only the knowledge that reaches the Qalb changes behavior. This is why you can read every book about the thing you struggle with and still struggle with it. Because information is not transformation, the gap between knowing and being is not crossed by knowing more. You have been in that gap for a while, haven't you? You know more than you live. You understand more than you practice. You have insight into your own patterns that you have not been able to translate into lasting change. And sometimes that knowing makes it worse, because now you cannot even have the comfort of saying you were not aware. You were aware. You just did not act. The scholars had a name for this too. Ilm bila amal, knowledge without action. And they considered it among the more painful spiritual conditions, not because it was unforgivable, but because it involves a specific kind of suffering. The suffering of someone who can see clearly where they need to go and cannot seem to get their feet to move. This is not a motivational problem. It is an alignment problem. The Nafs and the Qalb are pulling in different directions, and until that division is addressed at the root, at the level of intention and attention rather than effort and willpower, the gap between knowing and living will remain. Let us be specific about something. The internal conflict you carry is not random. It follows a pattern that is unique to you, built from the specific moments in your specific life where small decisions compounded in a specific direction. No one else has exactly your pattern, but the mechanism is the same. The mechanism is this: every time you chose comfort over truth, the Nafs grew more confident. Every time you ignored the movement of the Qalb towards something honest and difficult, the Qalb grew slightly more muffled. Every time you silenced the quiet pull of the Ruh by filling the silence with noise, the Ruh's voice became easier to miss. And the reverse is also true. Every time you sat with discomfort instead of fleeing it, the Nafs lost a small amount of its grip. Every time you honored what the Qalb recognized as real, even when it was inconvenient, the Qalb grew clearer. Every time you chose silence over noise, even briefly, the Ruh became slightly more audible. This is not a dramatic process. It is not a transformation that happens in a single moment of clarity. It is slow, it is incremental, it is built from the same kind of small, seemingly insignificant moments that built the patterns you are now trying to undo, one direction or the other, always. Now here is something that almost no one considers. The inner conflict you feel is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that you are not fully asleep. The people who have no inner conflict, who feel completely at peace with everything they do, who experience no gap between their choices and their values, are not the ones who have figured something out. They are the ones who have stopped listening, who have made peace with the Nafs entirely, who have dimmed the Qalb sensitivity so completely that the gap can no longer be felt. That absence of conflict is not health. It is a particular form of loss. The conflict you feel is information. It is the interior's way of telling you that something in you still remembers, still knows the difference, still has not accepted the distance as permanent. That discomfort is not your enemy. It is the last functioning alarm in a building that has been slowly filling with smoke. Let us talk about self-sabotage, not as a psychological concept, as an interior experience. You have done something before that you cannot fully explain. You were close to something good, something real, something that mattered to you, and you moved away from it. Not because an obstacle appeared, but because something inside you became uncomfortable with the closeness. This is not irrational behavior. This is the Nafs, in one of its more sophisticated movements, protecting you from something it has decided is dangerous. And what it has decided is dangerous is not failure. It is the vulnerability that comes with genuinely caring about something. The Nafs is very comfortable with wanting things vaguely, at a safe distance. But genuine proximity to something you deeply want requires a kind of openness that the Nafs experiences as a threat. Because if you genuinely try and genuinely fail, the ache will be real. And the Nafs is trying always to protect you from real aches. But here is the cost. A life managed entirely by the Nafs's risk avoidance is a life lived in the shallow end. Safe, comfortable, and completely unaligned with what the Ruh actually came here for. Think about the version of you that you want to be. Not the idealized, perfect version, just the honest version. The one who says what they mean, who follows through on what they intend, who is present in their relationships, who gives their best to what matters most, who stops hiding and starts actually living the life that is waiting for them. That version of you is not distant. They are not some future possibility that requires years of work before they can appear. They are present right now, obscured by the accumulated weight of small choices that moved in the wrong direction. And the distance between who you are right now and who you know yourself to be is not measured in achievements or habits or external changes. It is measured in moments of honest attention. Each moment of genuine attention to what is actually happening inside you collapses a small part of that distance. Each moment of ghafla, of heedlessness, rebuilds it. Here is something the scholars observed that might be difficult to hear. The Nafs does not want you to have this conversation with yourself right now. As you are sitting with these ideas, there is a part of you that wants to move on. Not because this is not resonating, but because it is resonating too much. Because something in you knows that if you stay with this long enough, something will have to change. And change, even chosen change, even deeply wanted change, is experienced by the Nafs as loss. The Nafs does not distinguish between losing something bad and losing something familiar. It grieves both equally. This is why people return to behaviors they hate, not because they want the behavior, because they cannot tolerate the feeling of its absence. The absence of a bad habit still feels like absence, and the nafs, left unexamined, will tell you that absence is emptiness, and emptiness is danger, and danger must be escaped. This is the loop. You have been in this loop, maybe in one area of your life, maybe in several, but you know the shape of it, the intention, the beginning, the resistance, the retreat, the guilt, the intention again. The loop does not break through force. It breaks through understanding. There is a moment described in the classical texts that is so simple it is almost startling. The scholars called it the moment of muhasabah, self-accounting, not self-criticism, not self-punishment, self-accounting. The act of sitting with yourself at the end of a day and asking, with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, what happened inside me today? Not what did I accomplish? What happened inside me? Where did I choose comfort over truth? Where did I notice the pull of the nafs and follow it without examining it? Where did the Qalb speak and I covered my ears? Where was the ruh's quiet pull toward something real and I chose noise instead? This is not an exercise in guilt. Guilt is the nafs repackaged as spirituality. It feels productive, but it changes nothing. It gives you the sensation of taking your failures seriously without actually doing the work of understanding them. Muhasabah is different. Muhasabah is the moment when you look at yourself clearly, without defense and without despair, and you see exactly what is happening. That clarity is itself the beginning of change, not the resolution, the beginning. Because you cannot navigate towards something you cannot see. You have probably had moments in your life when the interior suddenly became clear, when you woke up one morning and felt, for no obvious reason, that you understood something about yourself or your life that you had not understood the day before, when the noise quieted just enough that the signal became audible. Those moments were not accidents. They were the ruh breaking through. The Qalb briefly unclouded, the nafs temporarily quiet because some combination of circumstances and grace created a pocket of silence. And in that silence, you knew things. You knew what mattered and what didn't. You knew which relationships were nourishing you and which were draining you. You knew what you needed to stop doing and what you needed to start. You knew, with a clarity that felt almost embarrassing in its simplicity, who you actually were and who you actually wanted to be. And then the noise returned and the clarity faded, and you tried to hold on to it and couldn't, and slowly you went back to what was familiar. But here is what remained: a trace, a small memory of that clarity, a faint sense that it is real, that it is available, that it is not permanently beyond you. You are carrying that trace right now. It is what brought you here. Now let us look at the Qalb one more time, because there is something about it that the modern understanding of emotion completely misses. The Qalb, in its whole state, has a quality called salama, soundness, wholeness. The scholars use the phrase Qalb salam, a sound heart, to describe the interior condition that they considered most valuable of all. Not intelligence, not talent, not ambition, a sound heart. And when they described what a sound heart looks like from the inside, they described something very specific. It is not a heart that never experiences difficulty or doubt or temptation. It is a heart whose orientation remains consistent even when the surface is turbulent. A heart that knows where it is pointed even when it cannot see clearly. A heart that feels the pull of the nafs and is not swallowed by it, that hears the division inside itself and is not shattered by it. A Qalb Salim is not the absence of struggle. It is the presence of a stable center within the struggle. And the stable center is not something you construct. It is something you uncover. It has always been there, beneath the noise, beneath the patterns, Beneath the accumulated dimness of unexamined moments, there is something in you that has not been corrupted. The scholars pointed to this again and again with urgency and with tenderness. The ruh which Allah breathed into the human being at the moment of creation carries within it a fitra, an original nature that is oriented toward truth, toward goodness, toward the real. That original nature does not disappear, it only gets buried. And the entire process of inner work, the whole purpose of self-examination and attention and muhasabah and the quieting of the nafs is not to create something new in you. It is to unbury what was always there. This might be the most important thing said so far. You are not trying to become something you are not. You are trying to stop being covered by layers of yourself that were never really you. The habits that don't serve you are not you. They are responses that the nafs developed over time to manage discomfort. The patterns that you can't break are not you. They are strategies, old, outdated strategies that once served a purpose and now simply repeat out of momentum. The you underneath all of that, the one that occasionally breaks through in moments of unusual clarity, the one that knows what matters and what doesn't, the one that feels the weight of compromise and the lightness of honesty, that is not some ideal future version. That is you. You already know this. That is why the distance feels like distance and not like neutral territory. You can only feel distance from something you already recognize. Let us look at something very concrete now. You have probably noticed that your inner conflict does not affect all areas of your life equally. There are areas where you feel relatively aligned, where your choices and your values seem to move in the same direction, where you do not experience much of the internal drag, and there are areas where the conflict is intense, where the gap between who you are and who you want to be feels almost unbridgeable, where the same pattern repeats with a consistency that is almost mechanical. These are the areas where the nafs has established its strongest presence, where the habit grooves are deepest, where the most ghafla has accumulated. And interestingly, these are almost always the areas that matter most to you. The nafs concentrates its resistance where the stakes are highest, because where the stakes are highest is where genuine change would be most disruptive to its comfortable patterns. If something in your life was not important to you, the nafs would not bother. The resistance is proportional to the significance. This means something that might initially feel discouraging, but is actually clarifying. The areas of your greatest struggle are your areas of greatest potential, not because struggle is romantic, but because the struggle means something in you recognizes what is at stake there. The Qalb is present in those areas, even if it is divided. The ruh is pulling there, even if the nafs is pulling back. The conflict exists because both dimensions of you are engaged. All you need to do is make the engagement conscious. There is a practice that the classical scholars described, which is so simple it almost sounds too simple. It is the practice of intention, not willpower, not discipline, intention. Before you begin anything, you name what you are doing and why, not to yourself in a vague general way. Specifically, this specific action for this specific reason. The scholars gave this practice enormous weight because they understood something that is easy to overlook. Most of what you do without a clear intention. You move through your day on momentum, on habit, on autopilot. And when you move on autopilot, the nafs is driving, because the nafs does not need conscious direction. It runs on patterns. But intention interrupts the pattern. When you bring a conscious, specific, honest intention to an action, you are inserting your actual self into the moment. You are breaking the autopilot. You are creating, however briefly, the conditions for the Qalb to be present in what the hands are doing. This is not a spiritual performance, it is a practical interruption of ghafla. And the scholar said, with great specificity, that the quality of a deed is entirely a function of the quality of the intention behind it, not the outcome, the intention, because the outcome is not always in your control. but the intention always is. You might be reaching a moment in reading this where you feel something shifting, not a dramatic revelation, something quieter, a small movement of recognition, like a key turning in a lock you forgot was there. That movement is real. Do not talk yourself out of it. Do not immediately analyze it into abstraction. Do not ask what it means before you have let yourself feel it. Just notice it. This is what the scholars meant when they spoke of the Qalb being moved. Not an overwhelming emotional experience, not tears or ecstasy, a quiet movement, a small but genuine shift in the interior temperature. That shift is the most valuable thing that can happen in a person's inner life, because it means the Qalb is still capable of being moved. And a Qalb that can be moved can be directed, and a Qalb that can be directed can be changed. Here is the final layer. Everything described, the Nafs, the Qalb, the Ruh, the patterns, the division, the Ghafla, all of it is not a diagnosis of something broken. It is a description of something in motion. You are not a fixed thing that has gone wrong. You are a dynamic interior, constantly moving, constantly responding, constantly being shaped by the small moments of your attention and your choices and your intentions. And because you are dynamic, not fixed, nothing is permanent. The patterns are not permanent. The dimness is not permanent. The distance between who you are and who you know yourself to be is not permanent. Every moment offers the exact same thing, the opportunity to be slightly more awake than you were before. Not transformed, awake. The scholars did not promise transformation as an event. They described it as a direction, a slow, consistent, non-dramatic turning, like a ship adjusting its heading by a few degrees. In the moment, the change seems negligible. Over the distance of a life, it arrives somewhere completely different. You do not need to fix everything tonight. You do not need to understand everything completely. You do not need to feel ready or worthy or certain. You only need to take seriously the recognition that just happened in you. That small movement, that quiet shift, that faint but unmistakable sense that something here is true. The most dangerous thing you can do right now is process this as interesting information and move on. Because the Nafs is already preparing for that. It is already composing the thought that says, "This was good, I will come back to this." And you already know how that sentence ends. So before you move, before the noise returns, before the clarity fades back into the comfortable haze of ordinary days, do one thing. Name one area, just one, where the inner conflict is loudest, where the gap between who you are and who you want to be is most visible, where the patterns have been running the longest without being examined. You do not have to solve it. You do not have to know how to change it. Just name it, internally, honestly, without minimizing and without dramatizing. Just see it, because the thing you just named has been shaping your life from a place of invisibility, and something seen cannot fully control you the same way anymore. The Qalb does not need you to be perfect. The Ruh does not need you to have everything figured out. They only need one thing from you: honesty. Not the performed honesty you offer when you want to seem self-aware, the real kind. The kind that is slightly uncomfortable. The kind that notices what it notices and does not immediately look away. That is the door. Everything else is on the other side of it. You already knew something was off. You just did not know what to call it. Now you do. There is one more thing. The scholars who spent their lives mapping the interior were not distant, theoretical people. They were people who had struggled with the same movements of the Nafs, who had experienced the same division in the Qalb, who had felt the same pull of the Ruh towards something truer than what they were living. Al-Ghazali, before he wrote what became some of the most penetrating analyses of the human heart ever produced, went through a period of complete interior collapse. Not spiritual failure in the conventional sense, but a moment when everything he had built his identity around, his reputation, his certainty, His external achievement was revealed to him as insufficient, as a surface with nothing underneath it. He described the experience as one of profound disorientation. The things he had been using to avoid the inner examination no longer worked, and he was forced, not by choice but by the complete exhaustion of his avoidance strategies, to turn inward. What he found there changed everything, not because it was pleasant, but because it was real. And realness, however uncomfortable, is always more nourishing than the most comfortable illusion. You do not need a collapse to begin. The scholars would say that the very fact you are listening to this, that something in you brought you here, that the discomfort you feel when you hear these things is present and alive in you, means you are already in the beginning of something, not at the end of a comfortable life and the beginning of a difficult one, at the end of a certain kind of unconsciousness, and the beginning of something that has no adequate name yet, because you have not lived it yet. Because it is not a concept you can read about. It is a direction you have to walk, one honest moment at a time. The Ruh has been patient with you longer than you know. It has waited through every distraction, every avoidance, every loop of the same pattern. It has not given up its pull towards something real. It has not stopped its quiet insistence that there is more available to you than what you have been settling for. It does not get tired. It does not withdraw. It simply waits for the moment when the noise is quiet enough that you can hear it again. This is that moment right now, in the stillness after these words, before you reach for the next thing. That sound you almost hear, that faint pull towards something you cannot quite name, that is not confusion. That is the Ruh, reminding you what you came here for. And what you came here for has not changed. Not because of anything you have done or failed to do, not because of how long you have been in the loop, or how many times you have broken promises to yourself, or how dim some corner of your Qalb has become. The fitra, the original orientation that Allah placed in you, does not change. It only waits. And it has learned by now that you are still listening because you are here and you are still listening. The inner conflict was never the problem. It was always the invitation to stop being managed by what you have not examined, to stop being shaped by what you have not seen, to stop being someone who knows and does not live, and to begin, however slowly, however imperfectly, being someone who is actually present in their own interior, someone who hears the Nafs and is not swept away by it, someone whose Qalb is moving even when it is not yet whole, someone in whom the Ruh is not silent. That is not a destination, that is a direction. And the direction begins exactly here, in this moment of recognition, before you move on, before the noise returns, in the quiet that is still here, right now. If you choose to stay in it a little longer, the most honest version of you has been waiting for you to arrive. You were never as far as you thought.